and gentlemen, imagine yourself 2 years from today. You've just finished an important interview. You head out to the car park, but something important has changed in your life. Because you reach into your pocket and you pull out the keys to the brand new, top-of-the-range S-Class Mercedes-Benz. You press the button, it lights up like the Starship Enterprise. You open the door and expensive air escapes onto the pavement. You lower yourself down into the chair and you close the door because you're letting the poverty in. And you lower yourself into a world of leather and luxury and technology, because this car will drive itself, it'll park itself, it'll even massage you as you go. And you know you've arrived when even your car is willing to touch you indecently. And you consider what's changed in your life over the course of the past couple of years. And you trace it back to one decision that you made tonight. And it was the call to position yourself as a top-level expert in your industry by design. You made a choice that very few people are ever going to make. You stuck to it, you found the information, and you persevered, and you rose to become the top name in your industry. Folks, it's amazing how powerful that can be. Let's take a quick look in practical terms at exactly how powerful that is. I'm going to mention some industries that presumably most people in this room are not even involved in. And without thinking, I'd like you to give me the first name that springs to mind when I say bodybuilding. Arnold Schwarzenegger. The catchphrases? I'll be back. Hasta la vista, baby. Come with me if you want to live. Or perhaps more recently, vote for me if you want to live. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Ladies, anyone in the room find that physique attractive? I had a business meeting the other day with 200 ladies in the room, and I put up a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger, all veins and bulges, and I asked the same question, does anyone find that attractive? And 199 of the ladies all went, no, ew, gross. And from where I'm standing, I can see one lady at the back just starting to put up a hand. She's like, I'll keep that to myself. Anywhere in the world, when you say bodybuilding, you're going to get that name in response. People will say Arnold Schwarzenegger, and yet there are some interesting anomalies about that. Because Arnold Schwarzenegger won the Mr. Olympia contest, the highest honor in bodybuilding, 7 times, and that's remarkable. But folks, did you know that there are 2 men who have each won the Mr. Olympia contest 8 times? They outperformed Arnold, and yet his is the name that springs to mind. This is perhaps even more remarkable. Did you know that the last time that Arnold Schwarzenegger competed as a professional bodybuilder was in the year 1980? There are people in this room who were born after he stopped and still think of him as the big name in bodybuilding. That's remarkable. What can we learn from that? What if I say horror novels? What's the first name that springs to mind? Stephen King. Always the man who did for clowns what Spielberg did for sharks. Stephen King. Stephen King is also an interesting case study. When he started writing his novels, he wrote under 2 names. The first is his actual name, which really is Stephen King. And the second was a pseudonym, Richard Bachman. A while ago, I picked up one of the Bachman books, The Long Walk, and it is classic vintage Stephen King. It'll stay in your mind for weeks and it'll haunt your dreams. But fascinatingly, it didn't do terribly well in the US. When they first launched it, it sold 20,000 copies in its first couple of years. By US standards, that's incredibly small. Then something fascinating happened. Some of the readers who had read both books, the Stephen King and the Bachman books, caught on and said, this Bachman guy sounds an awful lot like our hero, Stephen King, and they outed him. And Stephen King describes Richard Bachman as dying of cancer of the pseudonym. And what they then did was they republished the same book under the name Stephen King. And in half the time, it sold 200,000 copies. Same product, same man, same market. Half the time, 10 times the sales. Folks, what would it do to your life, your income, and the way in which you approach your career if you could add an extra 0 to your annual income? And I do mean on the right-hand side. What would that change in terms of the kinds of deals you would do and the kinds of work you might even turn away? What would that change in terms of your sense of meaningfulness about your career? Let's give out another name. If I say motoring journalists, TV show, what's the first name that springs to mind for you? Not the show, but a human being. Jeremy Clarkson, yes. The best car show in the world. Until he punched his producer in the face. Clarkson is also a fascinating case study. When you consider that he had the same raw material with which to work as every other motoring journalist on Earth. What did he have? It's the new cars that came out every single week. And yet Clarkson wasn't earning, say, double the income of your average motoring journalist. He wasn't earning 10 times as much. He was earning on the order of 100-fold and more. What was he doing so dramatically differently that even though he was in an industry that had so many participants, he was able to out-earn them so radically? Does anyone ever watch Nigella's show, Nigella Lawson? My wife and I watch the show religiously for vastly different reasons. Nigella Lawson, would you say that she is one of the world's top 10 most qualified chefs? No? Yeah? Heads around the room saying no. Would you say that in terms of technical proficiency and education, that she is one of the world's top 100 most qualified chefs? There? Most people nodding no. Then why is she out earning all of them combined? Keep the answers politically correct. There's something else going on here. There's something that the Bransons of business, the Clarksons of cars, the Nigella Lawsons of that world are doing fundamentally differently, and it's adding an extra 0 or 2 to their annual income. Folks, regardless of what industry you're involved in, regardless of what you do for a living, whether you're a cartoonist or a chiropractor, whether you're an artist or a CEO, a salesperson or a windsurfer, whatever you do for a living, there are always 1 or 2 names that rise to the top. And life and the income is exponentially more rewarding in their case. So what are they doing differently, and how can we emulate them? Well, tonight we're going to ask some questions around that. And we're also going to try and debunk some of what I think are the myths around how to position yourself as an expert. But let's start by asking the question, why should you bother? Because I will be upfront with you about this one tonight. I'm inviting you to do much more work than is strictly necessary to get by in your industry. So why should you go to the time and trouble of positioning yourself as a pinnacle performer and a top name in your industry when you don't strictly have to just to get by? Well, I believe that there are at least 3 reasons why that is worth your while. In fact, tonight I'm going to throw in a bonus 4th because it's been playing on my mind. So, the reasons it's worth your while to put in the extra effort to become a top name by design and not just have a career by default. The first one is the most obvious one, and it's the material one. Experts earn exponentially more. And it's fundamentally unfair, but you can have it work in your favor. You could be an unknown consultant, go into a business anywhere in Johannesburg, and spend a month overhauling the inner workings, the guts of that organization. You hand in your invoice at the end of that time, and it has X number of zeros on the end. Then the very next week, Richard Branson drops by and does a half-hour presentation for the same company. And they add 3 more zeros. It's got nothing to do with how hard Richard Branson worked. It's the fact that he is Richard Branson. There is equity in being the top name in your industry. The second reason is perhaps a little bit more noble, a little more altruistic. Who here, you've just met my little guy, who else has children? And feel free to raise your hand if there's a very good chance. Yeah, most of the people around the room. If you have kids, or if you've ever coached or taught or mentored anybody, you'll know how deeply rewarding it can be when you have that moment where you teach something that this whole human being didn't know before. And you have that moment where the penny drops and the lights go on, and it's as though their whole world gets a little bit bigger. It's as though suddenly they have more levers by which to access the universe around them. That is incredibly rewarding. And as an industry expert, as the leading thought leader in your industry, you get to do that on a grand scale. You're not just a small cog in the system, you are one of the voices driving where the entire industry is going. The government is talking to you about how it should be. The media comes to you for insights about the world of tomorrow. CEOs and organizations want your insights about how to do this properly, and on an interpersonal level, you teach, you guide, and you show. Deeply rewarding. The third reason it's worth your while is perhaps the most interesting one of all, and it's really the one we're here to examine tonight. It fundamentally changes how you go about your sales and marketing efforts. This is the one we're really interested in tonight. Most of the people in this audience represent a business or an endeavor of some form where you are the champion, the leader, the business, or the brand. Whether you are an individual building your personal brand, or whether you have an organization and you want that brand to be iconic, this is the shift that happens when you position yourself as an expert. And I experienced it for the first time one quiet afternoon in my own little office at home. When I'm not wearing a suit and out at a corporate event or traveling, my office is very small. I sit with a pair of slippers on, I have a cup of coffee, and usually 2 dogs snoring at my feet. One day the phone rings, and there's a lady on the other side of the phone who uses a phrase that every entrepreneur loves to hear. She said, "Douglas, someone told me that you're the person to talk to about." And I put the new business in my diary and I thought, yay, that's fantastic. Now on that particular day, 20 minutes later, the phone rings again. And it's a call from a gentleman, another organization that I've never marketed to, and it's a large multinational company. I have no prior contact with them. I have never introduced myself. And the guy used the exact same phrase. He said, "Someone told us that you're the person to talk to." And the second time that I heard that phrase, the mood in my little office changed completely. It went from that glib, "Yay, that's fantastic," to, "Hang on a second. How did that happen? And how do I make that happen again on purpose?" Because folks, I'm sure you'll agree, that beats the heck out of cold calling. Isn't it wonderful when the business starts coming to you? And I like to think of it this way, and I invite you to join me in your imaginations. Picture a large crowd of people. This crowd represents your target market and your potential tribes of believing followers as an expert for the rest of your working life. So in your mind's eye, be generous with yourself. Picture a massive crowd of people. Wherever you have a large crowd, you always have 2 kinds of entrepreneur. There's the low-level operator trying to make a quick buck, and then there's the other side of that scale. Now let's start with the low-level operator trying to make a quick buck. In my mind, for some reason that I can never explain, it just works this way, I picture a guy wearing medieval costume, very much Robin Hood with the sort of little curly toes, the green outfit, the whole trip. And there he is with his hat with the little feather, and he has straps over his shoulders, and he's carrying a tray. And on the tray is this big pile of steaming pies. And what he's doing is he's going around the outskirts of the audience, tapping people on the shoulder one by one. And as each person turns around, he says, "Would you like to buy a pie?" And because the numbers of people are so great, from time to time, one person says yes. And they hand over a coin, and he hands over a pie. Now, to make another sale, our pie man has to tap another shoulder and sell another pie. And critically, if he stops tapping shoulders, he stops earning coins. You don't want to be the pie man in your industry. So what's the alternative? In your mind's eye, look over the heads of the crowd. And in the distance, you'll see a hillside. And halfway up the hillside, you'll see the guru. And the guru is the person that they have all assembled to listen to. Not because he or she is selling anything, but because this person represents who they want to be. This is a human being with thoughts and ideas about how their life could be better. This is someone who is freely sharing knowledge and information about how to get to where they want to go. This is someone that they look at and they say, "I want to be like her." And for that reason, the crowds come to the guru. Folks, you don't want to be the pie man, you want to be the guru in your industry. Or in the simplest possible terms, you don't want to have to go to them. You want them to come to you. When you position yourself as an expert by design, that is precisely what happens. So the first reason it's worth your while, experts earn exponentially more. The second reason, altruistically, it's rewarding. The third reason, it changes how you go about your sales and marketing. And I'll give you a fourth one that I've been thinking about this afternoon. I've been helping a young lady who's writing vegan books. And she's managed to get herself published in a magazine, writing an article, and she's now approaching publishers trying to get her book published, and she's really actually starting to make some headway. And we were discussing earlier today the idea that every small success gets you more of a yes for the bigger projects. Think about it this way. If you're Robert Kiyosaki writing books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you don't have to pitch to a publisher. They come to you and you have a yes in advance. When you're unknown, you go to the publisher and you say, please will you? Now the way that it works is there's this building of a critical mass in the world of expert positioning. You start with something very small. You write an article for your local community newspaper. That gets published and you take it to your local community radio station. And you say, I've been published in the paper, would you like an interview? On the strength of that, you get a yes there. You're heard there and you get invited to the next thing. And each one builds momentum as you go. Till you get to the point where proposing a show for CNBC Africa or proposing a book to Penguin Publishers gets you a yes based on your past successes. You may have to start small and you begin to build that critical mass. But the wonderful tipping point is when you have had so many successes that suddenly the business, the media, the deals start coming to you. I wonder if that started happening in your life yet, and I sincerely hope it has. In the book on how to own your industry and position yourself as an expert, I give a basic scale, and I talk about where you might be in your industry right now and what you should do to get to the next stage. Let's have a quick look. See if you can recognize yourself in these. And folks, the chances are you're not going to find just one level at which you peg yourself. You'll have a little of one and some of the other. So you start off as novice. That's the level where you get your basic training. You may have stumbled into a career, perhaps your parents encouraged you to do something. You don't know or love the industry. It's the beginnings of finding your feet. So that's level one. By virtue of the fact that you're here tonight, it's unlikely that you're at that level. The next level is working drone. Now, as a working drone, you're employed and you're developing competence, but basically you're still reacting to orders. You know what to do because someone tells you what to do. You don't have enough of an understanding of your industry to start doing it yourself. After that, you graduate to practitioner. That's when you've realized that there's a wider world to your industry and you've perhaps started to network. You read the industry publications, you seek out mentors, and this is starting to mean something to you. You've become a meaning-seeking creature and a sponge for information. Keep that up long enough, you go to the level of specialist. Now, as a specialist, you're displaying initiative. You no longer need to be told what to do, you know what should be done. And you're beginning to see the problems in your industry and the way in which your market needs to be assisted. You're heading up your own work, initiating your own projects, and you understand enough about your industry to operate independently in it. Chances are you're no longer employed. Next step is authority. I wonder if you find yourself here yet. You're developing a reputation. You're becoming known as a formidable figure within these circles. You're seen at events, you're requested as a speaker, you're sought after for articles and ideas. Has it started happening to you yet? I hope so. At that level, you start finding ways of doing the work that are uniquely yours. You're actually starting to pioneer here, and you're developing a unique signature. Keep it up long enough, you come up to the second from last one, which is thought leader. Now we're way beyond just being good at what you do. You're starting to exert the beginnings of control over the industry. In other words, the industry wants to know from you how things should be done. You are a voice and an authority. Keep that up long enough, and you end up at that rare one that defines people like Michael Jackson. You've become a legend. You've become synonymous with that world. When people speak about that industry, that world, that sphere of life, your name instantly springs to mind, even decades after you've passed away. Now, I'm not going to ask if anyone here has achieved that yet, because no one here has passed away. That's the ultimate goal, if you're interested. So our starting point then is to ask ourselves, what's missing in our education as we start approaching the world of business? What do most of us do wrong that we don't become experts? What stops us? Well, I believe that the answer lies in a unique definition of what an expert is. And I believe experts exist at the intersection of three critical qualities. And I also believe that we're only ever taught one of these qualities. That in our families at home, in our schools, and as we enter our business life and the working world, we are very rarely, if ever, told about the other two, the missing ingredients. So, the first quality that you have to be an expert, and this is non-negotiable, but it's also obvious, is knowledge. You've got to know your stuff. And that's the one that we intuitively think of when we think of experts. We think this person knows their stuff backwards and forwards. They have all the information. They're at the pinnacle of their game. They have the know-how. But folks, it is entirely possible to have all of the information, all of the knowledge, and not be seen as a top industry expert. For an example of this one, let's pick on the world of IT. So in any large organization, you will inevitably have that one person who has all the knowledge. They've been with this company for the last 20 years. They know how the programs work, how everything interacts with everything else, how the wiring is laid out. They know how to collapse that entire organization by pulling one plug out of a wall. This guy knows his stuff. But to find him, you don't get into the elevator and go up to the top floor office, to the corner boardroom, to the corner room with the ebony desk. No, instead you get into the lift and you go down to the third floor basement. You step out into the dark and the dank, and you walk past the creepy old VW Beetle that caught fire 10 years ago and has been abandoned down there. Don't worry, you're on the right track. You come to an old door that's marked janitor, and that's crossed out, and affixed over it is a little sign that says IT. You're in the right place. Now open the old creaky door, brush the cobwebs out of the way, kick the pizza boxes aside, and if you look toward the back of the room, there hiding in the gloom, staring at you with big eyes like Gollum from Lord of the Rings, is this guy who has all the information, all the knowledge, and no idea how to speak to other human beings. Have you ever met this guy? You find them in every industry. And the tragedy here is this is a person who is being remunerated on the level of a specialist, but never renowned at the level of an expert. They don't become iconic. They don't become synonymous with what they do, even though they have all the knowledge. This is the top 10 most qualified chefs on earth who are all being out-earned by Nigella Lawson. What are they missing? So the first ingredient is knowledge. The second one, and this is one that we're not taught, is personality. This is the one that distinguishes the Bransons of business, the Clarksons of cars, and the Nigella Lawsons of her world. It's that unique personality that sets them apart as human beings. And this often brings a bit of a fear factor, because for many of us, you hear that and we think, I'm not a Jeremy Clarkson. I'm not a big, bold, brash, loud, over-the-top personality. I'm not a Gordon Ramsay. I couldn't go on TV and cuss and swear. Folks, please don't change your core personality. You actually shouldn't. When you think about the Clarksons of the world and the Gordon Ramsays of their industries, these people genuinely are like that. That's their real personality. All they've done is they have taken it on a roadshow. But then you think of other people like, say, the Naked Chef. And that's a quiet, down-to-earth bloke. But he appears on TV, you hear him on the radio, you see his books published all over the world. And even though his personality is that of a down-to-earth, relaxed bloke next door, he is nevertheless one of the top 3 or 4 names we think of in that industry. So, when the fear factor sets in, don't worry, I am not asking you to alter who you are. What I am asking you to do is to show the world who you are. Think of it in the most simple terms. If you send the request for an interview through to, say, an editor at a magazine or a broadcaster at a radio station, you are still a name on an email. You're really just some letters on a piece of paper. But when you become a face and a voice in the public consciousness, that changes things. And that means that you've got to take your knowledge and your personality on a roadshow. And that's ingredient number 3, publicity. Knowledge, personality, publicity. True icons in any industry exist at the intersection of those three. And if you take one of them out of the equation, you disqualify yourself as a potential industry expert. Here's the formula by which to remember. If you have all of the knowledge, but no personality, you are a specialist. If you have all of the personality, but no knowledge, you are a Kardashian. Knowledge, personality, publicity, and then you take them on a roadshow. So folks, that's the heart and soul of the mix required to become an industry expert in whatever you do, to become the Tony Hawk of skateboarding, the Branson of business, the Clarkson of cars, whatever the case might be. Now, once you've done that, once you have that in place, how do you activate it? How do you make it come alive out there in the industry so that the business starts coming to you? And so that when people say, or when people talk about your industry, your name automatically springs to mind. Well, in the book, I have some 50 ways to do that. Tonight, I'd like to share 5, 6, maybe a few more, depending on how much time we have, practical ways that you can actively position yourself as an expert in your industry. And these are things you can start doing this week. So the first one, listen carefully because this is a slippery idea. Experts know that appearance is everything, and so they appear. Experts know that appearance is everything, and therefore they appear. So here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that you have to look like a clone of every other expert in your industry. In fact, chances are you probably shouldn't. I'm not saying that your watch has to come from somewhere in Switzerland, your shoes have to come from Italy, and your car has to have been made in Germany. Those are nice to haves, but they don't particularly matter in terms of your expert positioning. What I am saying is that in every industry, there are forums, and you have to be seen in those forums. Now, of course, that brings on a little bit of terror for most of us as well. Start with the idea of public speaking. We had a number of speakers in this room earlier for a workshop, and now we're a mix of entrepreneurs and professional speakers. So, out of this group here, who here actually enjoys speaking in public? Anybody at all? Okay, quite a good show of hands. That's a highly unusual number. You can stand up in front of 300 business people and say, who enjoys speaking in public, and get 0 hands. It doesn't even change the flow of oxygen in the room. And you know, anywhere on earth that you go, that's borne out. And there's an old joke that does the rounds about how, you know, they do surveys and they ask people, what is your #1 fear? And death consistently comes second. Public speaking tops the list. And of course, what that teaches us in practical terms is that at your average funeral, most people would rather be the guy in the box than the one delivering the eulogy. Think of it in the most simple strategic terms. If 99% of people are terrified of getting up and speaking in public, but you raise your hand and you volunteer yourself, you get up in front of that group, you get behind that microphone, you stand in front of that crowd, you change your positioning in the public consciousness. And it's pie man and guru. Think of this in terms of a networking evening. You go to a networking evening and you are the pie man. You've got to tap people on the shoulder one by one and explain who you are and hand out a business card, and maybe, just maybe, you sell a pie to that guy. But if you are the person speaking in front of everyone, in one go, everyone knows who you are, and you become the guru. And you do that on bigger and grander scales, and the more often you do it, the more you become the name at the end of the sentence. You know who you should talk to about that. And of course, that also means that you need to be seen in the media. How about volunteering yourself for radio interviews, for television interviews? How about volunteering your ideas to the world at large? Here again, the fear factor comes in, because our gut reaction to this is, I'm a terrified marshmallow. Who am I to declare myself an thought leader? Folks, here's the secret. There is no qualification exam to become a thought leader in your industry. Guess who nominates you to become a thought leader? You nominate yourself. You step up, you put up your hand, you volunteer, and you start carving out that reputation by design. When we get into any new industry, we often hear good advice like, go find out who all the key players are. Make sure you know all the big names, the movers and the shakers, the people who get things done. Not bad advice. In expert positioning, we flip that. We say, make sure all the big names in your industry know who you are. and it's not their job to seek you out. It's your job to appear in the public platforms. Experts know that appearance is everything, and so they appear. How do you appear? How do you get into those forums, and how do you practically go about that? That brings us to idea number 2. Experts give away their best ideas for free. Folks, to be a thought leader, you don't have to be the best in the world. To teach others, you don't have to know everything. You only have to know a little bit more than the people you're teaching. And you can teach and be a thought leader. To get the forums, give away your best ideas for free. The very beginning of this expert positioning journey in my life, when I started out, I went to a speaker's agent and I asked her, what can I do to build a career and get a little bit of traction? And she said something that, I mean, it's a little disingenuous, and she was obviously sort of playing it up and hyping it up in a lot of hyperbole. But she said, Doug, if you write a book, you are perceived as one step down from God. Yeah, I've written 7 books since then, so... She was overstating it, but there's a kernel of truth in what she said. And to write a book simply means that you need to teach and know a little bit more than the people you are teaching. The first book that I ever wrote was a basic little one about public speaking. It was all I knew. And I had a bit of a sort of an anomaly on my hands in the sense that I was a very young professional speaker getting up in front of corporate audiences who knew more than I did. And there's a credibility gap there. How do you fill it? Well, the one thing that I did know and the one thing I could teach was public speaking. I've now managed to grow that level of knowledge to the point where I can talk about strategic rule breaking to innovate in your organization. But you have to earn the credibility step by step. Here's something fascinating about giving away your best ideas for free. Our gut reaction when we hear that is, but that's my IP. If I give away my best ideas for free, what do I have left? The weird contradiction, and I promise it works every time, is that when you give it away for free, they come to you for the implementation. Your best intellectual property is also your best marketing content. If they don't know that you know it, you'll never get to do it. And you can give away your best ideas in articles and videos and interviews, and what happens is they go to you and they say, come and teach us how. Come and show us how. Write the book, do the speech, consult, whatever it is that you do. Give away your best ideas for free. They come to you for the implementation. The book of mine that has sold the best has done so by mistake on this principle. It's the one titled, Is Your Thinking Keeping You Poor? Now, of the various books, I mean, the books that I write are business books, and they're about building my career, teaching things, getting assignments, and so forth. This one is the anomaly. I wrote that one because it was a work of heart, and I felt that it was ridiculous that we live in a world where some people, like Elon Musk, are trying to turn us into an interstellar species at the same time as we have people who can't feed their families. There's something fundamentally wrong about that. So that one was really a work of heart, and I wanted to get the information out there. And to that end, I did something a little unusual, and I didn't ask Penguin's permission for this one. I took every chapter and I put it up independently on my website for free. So in other words, day by day, I gave away the entire content of the book. And then I put out little YouTube videos and so on that said, if you can't afford the book, the ideas are free, just go get them. Guess which book is my bestseller? Bizarre, but true. That thing has outsold the others on a level that I actually can't even conceive of. I received an SMS payment one morning where I looked at it and I went, what on earth is that all about? And you kind of trace the number of zeros and go, am I putting one too many zeros there? Give it away for free. Folks, what's your best idea about how things could be for your target market? What problems do they face every day that you can solve? Whatever it is that you do. I mean, say you're behind a camera, for example. What do your brides, your target market, worry about? What are they trying to achieve? How can you solve their problem? What problem are they actually trying to solve? You know, sometimes we miss what it is that our clients genuinely want to accomplish. When I got into this industry, I thought I'm selling 60 minutes worth of speaking. Wrong. I'm selling solutions to expensive problems for organizations. You cannot sell 60 minutes worth of speaking for what speakers and consultants charge. But you can sell solutions to expensive problems for those kinds of numbers. What do you actually sell? What does your target market worry about? And if they looked up to the hillside and they observed the guru and they saw that person that got that gut, visceral reaction, I want to be like that. What does that look like? Do you look like that now? And are you showing it to the world every single day through multiple channels? First idea, experts know that appearance is everything, so they appear. Second idea, experts give away their best ideas for free. Third idea, experts use high-impact messaging. Experts use high-impact messaging that distinguishes them from the crowd and from the noise and from the clutter. A while ago, I was looking at a beautiful photograph that appeared in National Geographic magazine. But it's a photo that is a mix of beauty and tragedy, of something incredible and powerful with an undertone of sadness. It was the launch of the Columbia space shuttle. And it's taken from far away, probably miles away, with this incredible critical focus. And in the foreground, you see this flock of birds, and behind them you see the fire and the smoke, and beyond that you see Columbia rising into the air, destined for what was going to become one of the worst disasters in all of human history. And obviously they spent a lot of time doing reconnaissance on what went wrong, and it's a long and it's a complicated story. The very simple version of this is it spent too much time on the launch pad and it had a faulty O-ring. But the fascinating part from a communication perspective, the interesting part for us as aspiring experts, is that the scientists had a darn good idea that this was going to go wrong. They were pretty convinced that they had a disaster on their hands. And what they did was they filled page after page of scientific technical information, dots and dashes and data and charts and graphs and little squiggly lines, and they submitted these thousands of pages to their superiors. Folks, do you think in all of those thousands of pages of charts and graphs and dots and dashes that the message got through? Clearly it failed. You know what would have been exponentially more powerful? One page, red lettering, it's going to explode, and an exclamation mark. Folks, this one, I mean, it's a sad story, but we see it every single day. There is a universe of difference between having the knowledge and making it come alive. And for my money, most people in most industries have the knowledge, but they don't know how to make it come alive for their target market. Having the knowledge is only half your job. Turning it into a message is the balance. Enter Jeremy Clarkson. Anyone here, aside from watching the Top Gear shows or perhaps the Grand Tour, anyone ever read Clarkson's writing, the articles that he wrote for the newspapers? Now, as an aspiring industry expert, make a point of getting hold of one of his books and read the articles he used to write for, I think it was the Sunday Times. The writing in there is exactly like what you hear in Top Gear. He thinks and he speaks in metaphors. The man always talks in analogies and word pictures, and it makes his messages come alive. And that's one of the things that distinguished him from the other motoring shows around the world. One evening, Top Gear, genuine story, gets an award at the BBC Awards show. And they call Clarkson to the front of the room to get his trophy. And there's Clarkson walking up to the front to receive the trophy for Best Factual Documentary. Clarkson stands at the front, scratches his head, looks at the trophy and says, "Well, thanks very much for this, but we haven't used a fact in our show in the last 5 years." Takes his trophy and sits down. And they don't speak in facts and figures and dots and dashes. They spoke in metaphors and stories and analogies. Your average motoring journalist might say something like, "Most supercars are heavy and hard to manage, but this one is light and agile." Not Clarkson. Clarkson's take on that is, "Your average supercar is like wrestling an elephant up a loft, but this one is like rubbing honey into Kiera Knightley." You're never going to forget that image. And that's how they spoke all the way through the Top Gear episodes. And their own take on it was, they said, we don't care about the facts and figures. We care about the lifestyle of the thing, about the story that the car tells, about the brand and all of that good stuff. That's what experts focus on, and they do it incredibly well. I think maybe his most disturbing analogy was, "It's about as feminine as a burst sausage." Experts use high-impact communication. In other words, they don't put up slides and clutter the world with charts and graphs and dots and dashes. They cut through to the heart and soul of the thing their audience wants to know. They tell stories that make that information come alive. They live the kind of persona and identity that their tribes of believing followers want to be. They show the way forward by becoming the guru on the hillside. One powerful way that you can do that is to use frameworks. I'm a great fan of frameworks. What is a framework? Well, it's just your unique way of wrapping up and presenting your ideas to the world. There's a little experiment I sometimes do at conferences, and it just works like an absolute charm. I take the cover to the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, and I find a version of the cover that's either in Chinese or Arabic or something that is not common to the audience that I'm speaking to on the day. And I put it up on the screen and I say, what book is that? 100% of the time, the audience looks at the purple and the black on the cover and they go, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Now that's a fabulous result to get. They're looking at the branding and they know what it is without any of the wording. No pictures, nothing. The strength of the framework has become profound. How many hundreds, how many thousands of books have been written on the topic of wealth and how to escape poverty? Rich Dad, Poor Dad is the most successful framework within that world. He's found a novel and unique way to present that information that has become famous in and of itself. And there are many examples of that. I mean, books are quite good examples to go chasing after. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Ever heard of that one? That's a framework. How about Chicken Soup for the Soul? You heard of that one? Think about how clever that is. You could have titled that Uplifting Stories for When You're Feeling Down. Chicken Soup for the Soul. The framework becomes memorable. There are a number of things you can do with a clever framework, your unique way of talking to the world. Jaguar has recently come up with an absolutely brilliant one. That's a brand, and we were chatting earlier on, that has reinvented itself and reinvigorated itself. I quite like their previous tagline, which was, how alive are you? That appeals to me. But their new one, and I swear this was inspired by Jeremy Clarkson and Top Gear talking about Jaguar, is that whole thing about being a baddie on purpose. It's good to be bad, and we all drive Jaguars. Now, that is so unique, but once again, they're appealing to something visceral and emotional. They're like, take business class sedans. We are the sexual deviant of business class sedans. It's clever. It's very clever. What framework do you present to the world? There are at least 2 things you can do with a clever framework. The first one is you can use it to access a new market. So a while ago on Travel Channel, there was a show titled Skinny Dip. Folks, by a show of hands, did anyone here ever watch the show Skinny Dip? And please don't leave me as the only pervert with my hand raised. Okay, no, me neither, but I heard about it. So Skinny Dip actually wasn't anything controversial. What happened was, a group of young ladies from Canada would go to different watering holes around the world. They'd either find a little river or a beach or some place that the locals could swim. And in a half-hour episode, they would all hike together to this watering hole, and in the last 30 seconds, because this was a family-friendly show, as the credits started rolling, they would all take off their clothes, run into the water, and that was the end of the show. Hence the title Skinny Dip. Now, I'm not saying that I PVR'd and recorded the entire half hour just to get to the last 30 seconds, but what I am saying is quite interesting. These young ladies who presented the show had no prior journalistic experience. They had no prior broadcasting experience, and they had no prior travel experience. And yet they were able to land an internationally syndicated show on Travel Channel on the strength of a novel framework. Next time you're submitting an article to a newspaper, to a magazine, you're proposing an interview to a TV or a radio station, what if you came up with a framework, a headline, a quirky way of wrapping up and presenting your information that was so clever, so unusual, and so emotive that the editor, the broadcaster, the publisher looked at that and went, we've got to find out what that's all about. Frameworks can gain you access to a market. The second thing that they can do is perhaps even more useful. They give you an excuse to keep talking to your market. In a group like this, it's highly likely that a good handful of people have written industry-related articles for an industry publication. Now, the trick is to keep on doing it. Getting into the publication once is great, but you need 7 or 8 or 9 hits in that publication before people start going, that's the person to talk to. How do you keep on doing that? Frameworks are one answer. So take the world of bodybuilding. I mentioned earlier that there are two men who have outperformed Schwarzenegger by winning the Mr. Olympia contest 8 separate times. One of them was dubbed the King. Anyone know his name? Yeah, Ronnie Coleman is his name. If you or I ever met him in public, we'd just say, sir. This was a large man. And he would appear on the cover of Muscle and Fitness and Flex magazine and so on. And those bodybuilding magazines have a unique challenge on their hands. For the last 50, 60, in some cases 70 years, they've been putting out a magazine every single month with 150 plus pages on the topic of how to pick up and put down heavy stuff. How much can you possibly say about that? Homework. Go downstairs at Skoobs and find yourself a bodybuilding magazine and flip to the first article in something like Flex or Muscle and Fitness, and you'll see the clever use of frameworks. You get to the first article and it says something like the US Marine workout. And if you're a 22-year-old guy, you look at that and you go, that's cool, I gotta buy that magazine. I gotta do the US Marine workout. Now, you flip another 10 pages and you get to the 10-ton workout. And the premise of this is that in 1 hour at gym, collectively and accumulatively, you're going to pick up and move around 10 tons worth of weight. And if you're a 22-year-old guy, you look at that and you go, that's cool, I got to buy that magazine, try the 10-ton workout. But if you're paying attention, you'll notice that the 10-ton workout is exactly the same as the US Navy SEAL workout. Shh. Now you go another 10 pages and you get to the Russian Olympian workout. Are you as tough as Russian Olympian? Try our exercise. And you look at that as a 22-year-old guy and you go, ooh, I gotta try that. But if you're paying attention, you'll notice that the exercises are exactly the same as the last two. All they're doing is cleverly repackaging the same ideas using fascinating frameworks. You can do it too. What's the thing you teach? What's the information that your target market wants? What are the fears that they have when they deal with you or your industry? What can go wrong? Can you solve those fears? Can you give that information away for free? If so, if you repackage the information in clever ways, you can keep on speaking to your market. And folks, even if you get bored with your own message, consider that you are marketing to a moving parade. There are always new customers, new clients, new people to populate your tribes of believing followers. Keep putting the message out there and keep doing it. And of course, these days, YouTube has become an incredibly powerful way of doing that as well. So you definitely want to get the videos out there as much as you possibly can. Experts out-innovate the rest. When we get into an industry, our heart's desire is to look like the businesses and the brands around us. We look at the competition, we go, in order to be credible, I must look like them. As we get a little bit further along, we realize that's the worst thing we can possibly do. We want to stand out and be nothing like them. Speaker Joe Calloway in the United States talks about becoming a category of one, where you are so distinctive that you don't have competition. And I've heard of other speakers talk about this idea where when you are that distinctive, it unlocks hidden budgets. In other words, if you're a commodity and you're like every other version that is offered in your industry, people will shop for you on price, which is a worst case scenario. But when you are so distinctive, so novel, that there is something theatrical and unique and special about you, it unlocks hidden budgets and they find ways to afford you. Rather than having the event and seeing if they can get you, they build the event around you because you're one of a kind. How do you become so exclusive and so unusual that you stand out in your industry? Well, experts out-innovate the rest. And very often that's about asking a simple but very difficult question. And the difficult question is, what's awful about dealing with my industry? What's awful about dealing with us? Virgin Atlantic used this technique to great effect. I heard a voiceover on 702 the other day. And the voiceover comes on and says, don't you hate the fact that you have to pay for your plane tickets in full before you can apply for your visa to go overseas? Now, has that ever happened to you? Caught my attention. The voiceover goes on to say, at Virgin Atlantic Airlines, we are the only airline that will fully refund your ticket if you don't get your visa. I thought that's absolutely brilliant. They've got all the technology in the world, huge budget to spend on changing the inside of their planes, but they haven't bothered with that. They've done something much cleverer and much simpler. They asked, what's awful about travel? What's difficult about dealing with airlines? And they even went prior to the experience of engaging with them and said through the whole process, what's lousy about this? And they found a way to solve that problem. And that's the heart and soul of innovation. It can even become disruptive innovation where you don't think like your peers and your competitors. By asking what's awful about this industry, you may find ways to do it fundamentally differently. I'll leave you with perhaps just a couple of ideas. The last one here, experts outlearn the competition. Did anyone here know that there was a World Championships for public speaking? Ever heard of that one? Yeah. It's hosted by Toastmasters International. Ever heard of them? Yeah. Toastmasters International hosts this World Championships every year, and they choose the best speaker, the world champion of public speaking. One year, it's won by a young man named Craig Valentine. And Craig Valentine, on his trip back home through the airport, back to his home city in the States, does something interesting. He leaves his crowd of Toastmasters friends and he pops into a bookstore. And when they walk in, they ask him, what are you doing? He's standing at the counter and he's buying a book, and it's a book on public speaking. So here's a world champion buying a book on the fundamentals of public speaking. And I mean, it stops them in their tracks. They say, Craig, seriously, you're the best in the world. What are you doing? And he says with no hesitation, the second I think I've arrived, that's when I start going backwards. Folks, experts are relentless about being at the pinnacle of their game. They make sure that they don't become outdated, that they keep up with the latest techniques, that they're pioneering the latest techniques, that they're always doing the next big thing in their world. It's that obsessive energy that says, I don't just want to be good enough, I want to be the greatest. Arnold Schwarzenegger talks about doing this on purpose. When he was a young man living in Austria, he did something fascinating. He moved to the United States to study the bodybuilders, the best in the world, but he did it in a way that was different to how most of us think. He went to California with the intention of finding out how many reps, how much weight, how many sets, exactly how much of every exercise the top bodybuilders are doing, so that he could do more. We look at our heroes, our icons, the leaders in any industry. More often than not, our human reaction is, how can I be like? How rare to look at a person like that and say, how can I surpass? Could you? Who's your icon? Who's your hero? Could you go a step further? Could you gift and contribute to your industry by taking things one notch further than anyone who has come before you? That's how civilization advances. It's what we do as a species. It's very high-level stuff, and it all boils down to some very simple formulas. Experts exist at the intersection of knowledge, personality, and publicity. We take who we are and the highest levels of what we can do, we take them on a roadshow, and we give away our best ideas for free. Folks, you can do all of these things and still accidentally disqualify yourself as a speaker. Here are a few, as an expert. Here are a few things that can go wrong. You arrive at your client's building and you do what I call the circus car arrival. It's not about the quality of the car. It's the fact that when you pull up and you open the back door, 6 family members fall onto the pavement. And you ask if you might leave your Uncle Phil in the waiting room. Don't worry, he won't break too many things, he usually doesn't. It's about how we're perceived, the chip packets, the Coke cans that fall out of the car when we arrive. How about stealing the sugar? Imagine you go to a networking event and you're seen at the front of the room, you're sharing ideas, you're leading the way, and then they see you take out your Tupperware and put a little bit of lunch and slide it under the desk. You disqualify yourself as an expert. What if you are the best fashion photographer in the country? There you are, you take photos of models, you take photos of brides, and when you hand over the CD, the album, whatever the case might be afterwards, you've misspelt the model's name or the bride's name on the cover of the DVD. Does it matter how good your work was? You've disqualified yourself as an expert. How about neglecting the ribbon? Has anyone here bought a new car within, say, the last couple of years, even a pre-owned car? Yeah, a few people. What was the one thing that you wanted when you arrived at that showroom floor? Yeah, it cost like $5 from C&A, but that ribbon better be there. That's part of the experience of getting the car, and it's deeply disappointing if it's not there. We can add ribbons to the things that we do. A while ago, I go and I buy myself a shirt. And I put it on a counter in this high-end store. And the lady behind the counter has been trained in how to add ribbons to your experience. So I put it down on the counter and she makes meaningful eye contact with me. And she says, "Excellent choice, sir. Bravo." Now, you and I know that if I put down a pink polka dot thong, she would have made meaningful eye contact with me and said, "Excellent choice, sir. Bravo." Works anyway. So then she wraps up my shirt and she puts a little ribbon around it. And then she walks around the counter and presents it to me. She doesn't hand it to me over the counter, she presents it to me. And I swear in that moment, it was like light came down from the ceilings and cherubs sang and it went from being a shirt to a shirt. What are your customer touch points? Are you adding a ribbon? Are you doing something a little theatrical, a little memorable, a little special? What excuse are you giving your clients to generate buzz about you and tell people this one is special? What are your customer touch points? When we neglect the ribbon, we disqualify ourselves as experts. Gentlemen, here's another one that disqualifies as experts: the leering uncle. You're brilliant at what you do, but it's like, "Hello, customer, come sit on my knee." Our reputations do not survive that. Here's the worst of the worst. A while ago, our electric gate breaks down at home. We call the guy out, he's going to help us, he's going to fix it. He stands next to me, and he makes a series of hardcore racist jokes at the expense of his own employees, assuming that I would think it was funny too. I didn't. I vote with my money, I will never use him again. Don't assume a shared prejudice. You can disqualify yourself as an industry expert. Folks, if you have the courage to nominate yourself, if you have the will and the desire to do it by design, you can become a pinnacle name in your industry. You might be as grand as the Oprah internationally, or perhaps the Felicia locally. You can become the name at the end of the sentence. You know who you should talk to about that. If you out-care your competition, put your heart and soul into showing the best of you to the world. Drive your industry forward and be one of the voices determining where it's going. Give of your best and let your light shine. And may you be richly blessed as you make the choice to actively position yourself as an expert. Thanks for your time. Folks, if you want to chat with me, please do come and have a conversation with me. This is a topic that I love. And if I can in any way align the ideas to what you do in your world and your universe, I'd love to do that. Once again, thanks so much for your time.